By
Okay.
the way, I second the motion for what Sarah wrote. I won't
Okay.
What? I didn't see. Mm,
All right, we've got like 50 people have already joined. We had 138 total who RSVP'd. So I'll go ahead and start. And Karma stepped away. So we'll start off Karma Feinstein Cohen, who is the executive director of World Herut and World Macrame Herut.
Thank you. So do we dive in?
Yeah.
Okie doke. First of all, for everyone who's at 6 p.m. somewhere in the United States, I'm here in Israel. And Miriam, it's an honor to be here today. And the topic is so interesting and so important. And I'll give a little bit of my perspective as an Israeli American, an American Israeli, but more than anything, a Jew living in Israel, who woke up on October 7th to a completely different world. My daughter and I had tickets for the Bruno Mars concert on Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat. And my biggest worry at Shabbat dinner was, will we find parking and will there be restrooms at this place? And this is what I was concerned about. And I was really nervous about this. And today I give this example because we woke up in the morning and on Shabbat, I sleep in a little bit and I turned on the television, and what looked like for the first 2 or 3 minutes that there was just more rockets coming, into the Gaza envelope. Unfortunately, we've become accustomed to it. It's something, the drizzling of rockets is something that we've become accustomed to. And I want to say that about 5 or 10 minutes into this, news flash, we saw a name of a very close colleague who had been murdered, and he was the head of the regional council of the Negev of the South, one of the southern regional councils. And suddenly it hit us that this is something very, very different. Now, we live in Samaria, so we're far away from, as far as anything can be in Israel. It's such a tiny country, but we're certainly far away from the Gaza envelope. We're surrounded by Arabs, but it's a totally different region. And slowly but surely, the news started to trickle in. And at one point, devastation hit for one specific reason. We understood that we had been invaded by terrorists. Now, as an American Israeli who served in the IDF for 3 years, my husband served for 4 and did reserve duty until he was 48, Kanahara, and we part of our life is being in the IDF and being very proud Israelis, and knowing that, in a minute we'll say something about my knowing that we're the strongest army in the world. Nobody can invade our country, to an extent where I think we were almost a little bit overly confident. And we were slapped in the face to the extent where, you feel like your head's spinning around in circles. The sheer dread that towns have been invaded, infiltrated, that homes are no longer safe. As the hours went by, we started to realize the horrors of the invasion. Nobody understood yet, the magnitude of what had happened, what had been done, but we started to feel unsafe. And this is a feeling that we experienced, I want to say, for about 2 weeks. And what the heavy heart, more than anything else, was, number one, how the heck did we let this happen? How did we let this happen? And it's this cold dread that there's still terrorists roaming around our country. And it's something that, as a cocky Israeli, you don't really think that the IDF is the strongest army in the world. you can't do that to us. We're going to win every war. You know, we've got Hashem on our side. We've got God on our side. We've got justice on our side. Nobody's going to do that to us. And it happened. And it happened, and it hit us very, very hard. And then as the days went by, the numbers started to come out. And on TV. And the news was on in a loop, like everything was 24/7. By the way, 24/7. Slowly but surely, I think in the last month or so, they started doing a little bit less of 24/7 news and showing, I can't say comedy or, you know, but things that are just a little bit more normal, because after 3 or 4 months, the country has to get, you know, psychologically back to normal. But if somebody says to you that Israel is back to normal, Israel is not back to normal. And I think that in a sentence or two, what we're feeling here is also a feeling that this has affected wool jewelry and our friends, and that if at one point in Israel we felt that we're the security blanket, or we're the key to security for world jewelry, now we feel a symbiotic relationship between we need you and you need us, and there's no more room for feeling, you know, that there's a division, that there's, you know, the ones that make Aliyah are the ones that have, you know, are better, or these are all things that, you know, when you leave the United States, when you go to live in Israel and you feel that you've done something, you know, monumental, you've made this change in your life and you're, excuse me, coming to save the world. I think that October 7th put things into perspective. Israeli Jews and Israelis need world jewelry just as much, and we need our friends in diaspora. We need the good people have to stand up and be good together. And there are a lot of good people out there. There are a lot of good people. Unfortunately, there's a lot of evil. I think that one of the things that hit me at one point was that all of my colleagues that were peace activists, for example, never spent enough time and energy dealing with UNRWA or with the educational system in the Palestinian Authority, in Gaza, in Muslim schools, in Israel. You know, if you want to do good to make peace, start educating. If you want to make the world a better place, educate. So I think that today we're seeing things that we did not experience in the past. The feeling that we're all going through this together is, to me, nothing less than divine intervention. I think that there is a reason that we're starting to be able to see the difference between good and evil, you know, very, very clearly, and that the good guys have to stick together. And I really, really want to thank Miriam for the idea and the initiative behind this webinar. And that's my 2 cents on October 7th. I could talk for 3 hours, but I won't. So back to you, Miriam, and thank you so much for hosting this.
Okay. As you know, this is going to be about Black and Jewish relations since October 7th. I had Karma give us sort of an overview of what happened, or from an Israeli point of view, being there on the ground. I'll introduce our panel very quickly for those who are watching. I'll start off in the top corner, how I see it. I have Jason Winnett. I have Brandy Shafetinsky with the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. I have Charles Jacob for the Americans for Peace and Tolerance, and also with the Jewish Leadership Project. I have Robert Cotillo with CBS News at Radio Atlanta. I have Heather Michelson, the Baltimore Zionist District. I have Melanie Collette, who is also works with me. We work together on Project 21. And I have Elisheva Rishon with the Zahav Fellowship of Black Jewish Zionists. First, I think I would start with the question. After we always knew that Black and Jewish relationships were strained over the years, but I think we've seen it become more strained in the last 3 months since October 7th, than I've seen in, since I've been around. And some of it is not understandable. Because you have a country that was invaded, brutally invaded. And I see, especially among younger generations, where they're siding with, not only siding with Palestinians, but siding with Hamas. And they see it all as part of the resistance and not as terrorism. And I'm sort of curious, where did all this, or anybody have ideas of where this came from? Whoever, Melanie.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, I think you look no further than our higher institutions and how the former president of, I think it was Harvard, Claudine Gay, handled that whole situation, saying that it was situational, whether or not, there could be protests chanting anti-Semitic slurs. I think that when you look at that situation and the other colleges who had those issues too, and just full disclosure, I've taught on a college level. I was an educator for 24 years. I can tell you that that environment is extremely toxic. Just when it comes to racism, I would say that that environment from an educational perspective encourages racism, and it's what's happening in our schools is where it begins. And it got a lot of the things that we're talking about now, those of us who were in the trenches in public schools have been screaming about for years, but it's just since COVID and since all this other stuff happened, it has come to the forefront in our attention. But I would say that it started in the schools.
And just to kind of hop in, I think we also have to look at the generation we're currently discussing. The people who are 20, 22, 25 right now, they grew up in the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. Their introduction to public policy and military policy was being lied to by Colin Powell, being lied to by George Bush in order to launch wars into the Middle East. So they are far more skeptical and leadership now when it comes to these issues of dealing with issues of terrorism, of dealing with issues of believing governments. And then also, since we're talking about the issues between the African-American community, Jewish communities, I think Netanyahu has done no favors. If you go back to the beginning of the Obama administration, Netanyahu walked into the White House with just complete disdain for President Obama, that many people took it as a slight, as if Netanyahu was acting as if he ran the White House and Obama was simply invited there to join with them. And I think that we've never really built back that gap that was created by the interactions between Netanyahu and Obama. If people think back 50 years, much of the civil rights movement was funded by a coalition between African Americans and the Jewish community. Many of the initiatives pushed through in 1965 and 1964, 65, 67, Title IX, Title VII, etc., were all coalition efforts between Black, Brown, and Latino organizations in the Jewish community. But we very much have lost that in this field of foreign policy. And I think that there's going to need to be some efforts made in order to stitch those things back together so we can be on one accord going forward. But that's going to take give and take on both sides.
But I want to also say go back to what Melanie says with education. A lot of this, it's two-sided. It's also what was taught in the schools, but we also have found out the amount of money that has been put into public education from places like Qatar and Libya and other Arab countries going back to the 80s that has slowly, I don't want to say indoctrinated, but slowly seeped into our school systems. I remember a few years back, I had heard a lady talk about how a lot of the textbooks were all coming out of one source, and that one source was highly funded by Qatar. And instead of showing Israel, talking about 1948, it showed Israel as an aggressor instead of, Israel was declared a state on 1948, and then all the Arabs invaded it. They made like Israel came in and invaded the Arab countries. And that affects a lot of how these students think. I'm going to go in order for things here. Charles, go Charles first.
Okay, so I think Robert has a point about the tension between Netanyahu and Barack Obama. I also think that this goes back much longer than that. to the beginning of the takeover of classic liberalism by progressivism. And you had this theory of intersectionality, which I think is both the cause and could be the solution to the problem. And let me just say, so intersectionality says to all minority groups that you have to join with each other because the oppressor is white and you are the oppressed, and none of the oppressed groups can be criticized. And the Blacks, who were the primary victims of white oppression in this country, allowed lots of other groups to claim to be on the victim team with them. Now, they even allowed Arabs and Muslims to be on the victim team. And according to intersectionality, anybody who's a minority in this country could be considered to be a victim, except for the Jews, which we'll go into in a second. But the fact of the matter is that if you take that concept and you bring it over into Africa or the Middle East, the opposite is true. It's the Arabs and the Muslims who are the majorities and who are oppressing black minorities in Nigeria today. The Christian community in Nigeria, the Blacks, get October 7th almost every week. That is Boko Haram, which we remember Michelle Obama had the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls, attacks Black Christians in the same way that Hamas attacked the Jews. That is up close, personal knives, raping the women, kidnapping the children. Arabs and Muslims have Black slaves all over North Africa. And nobody cares about that because according to intersectionality, which blinds people, you may not criticize anybody in this country if they're a minority in this country. So a real intersectional alliance would be with Blacks, Jews, and Africans, all of whom have been attacked by jihad. And I'm in the middle of creating a Black-Jewish alliance. I got to talk to all you about that, where we're going to say free Black slaves today from Muslims and Arabs in Nigeria. And I've put together Nigerians and Southern Sudanese and Darfuris, and we're going to bust this open because it's outrageous that intersectionality forces Blacks almost, and everybody else, to ignore the victims of the worst human rights catastrophe on the planet, because they're not allowed to criticize anything that any Arab or Muslim society ever did, ever thought of, or has continued to do. So I think that could be the way to reframe the Black-Jewish alliance, and I'll just let it go.
Okay, Elisheva?
Okay, well, first of all, yes, there is a problem when it comes to education. I don't know if anyone knows, but I used to be in the student teaching program for grades 7 through 12, and I had to make lesson plans, and these textbooks were highly problematic. There was a point in time where we were using outdated textbooks because the newer ones were even worse than the older ones. Jews did not exist in the context of the Middle East or Africa. In fact, the Holocaust didn't even show a leading up point. It just suddenly started in the 1930s, and then all of a sudden there was a Holocaust. They didn't talk about the 1880s. They didn't talk about the buildup. And I'm like, wow, this is historically inaccurate, but this is what we're teaching children. It is what it is. But the bigger problem that people always seem to miss is social media. Because these kids, they go to school. That's great. That's nice. But do you really pay attention in school? No. You're on your phone. And when you get home, you're on your phone. And certain educational resources, for example, AJ, I didn't even know at the time that AJ was actually Al Jazeera. And they called themselves AJ on purpose to mislead Western audiences thinking, hey, I'm just like you, I'm one of you. And they posted about everything. They posted about children being held in cages. They posted about every single time someone Black was shot and killed and unarmed. They posted about everything. And then every now and then they would sprinkle in some anti-Zionism. And I was like, that's weird. But everything else that they post is solid, so I'm going to rock with them. AJ has been around for a long time. AJ has raised people that are currently teenagers all the way into their 30s. That's how long AJ's been around. And the whole time it was Al Jazeera. So social media in itself, you can send a lot of information very quickly all around the world immediately, instantaneously, and there's no background checks. No one's looking into any resources, and then they post a resource from someone that's not even legit, and no one's looking into the background of that person. So social media is at the center of what's happening right now. Yes, I know what's happening in the school system. It is what it is. Personally, I feel when it comes to college, it's like college is just like capping them off. Like, when you're pouring like a cup of wine and you just tip it off a little bit, like that just finishes them off. But they already were drinking the Kool-Aid since they were children because they're on social media. They're on Facebook, they're on Telegram, they're on IG, they're on TikTok, they're on Discord. And by the way, Discord and Telegram are very awful apps, very awful, which is why the terrorists love it and they use it actively. Yes, that I believe is the main cause of what's happening. We're fighting a propaganda war. Yes, there are actual people dying. There are actual people dying in this war. There are Palestinians, there are Israelis. People are dying, but that's not the real war. The real war is happening online. And it's been a good 30 years till they got to this point.
All right, Heather.
Yeah, so I think I've been listening to all of this. Certainly, I'm not, I agree with most of what's been said today. I also thought to say that this disunion on the most recent events, right? I knew there was a disunion in the Black and Jewish community, not really where I live, because we live side by side each other in Pikesville and North Baltimore and West Baltimore. We're all, on a daily basis, standing next to each other in checkout lines and being annoyed by the same people, and, like just the same kind of lives we live. And so when October 7th happened, obviously I was in shock for a couple of weeks. And then, there was a place where I got, where we're used to people saying now it's Israel's fault, right? For a little, we're always used to that happening, right? We get attacked, for a minute, people are with you. And then about, whatever, a month later, people are like, oh, Israel's the one to blame. I was really amazed at how quickly people turned on us this time. It was almost like the day after. It was the worst attack, and then the day after, people turned on Israel, and I couldn't really figure it out. I wasn't, it was different. And so I think the point about social media is well made. I also, go to, in the March on Israel, right? We go to DC. I took my son. It felt safe enough to take my almost teenager son to DC with me, and I was a bus captain or whatever. So I read the thing on the sheet that said, don't interact with people. If they get in your face, just walk away. Just don't try, you know what I mean? Just, this is a rally for Israel. It is nothing else. If there are protesters, let them protest. And so I read it. It was perfunctory. And then we got down, we were let off at the metro, and we got down on the metro, and this woman looked at me and my son and started shaking her head at me. I know what you're doing. And I was like, I'm waiting for the metro, actually. And she found on her a phone, it was a Black woman. She found on her phone a Palestinian flag, and she held it up. And she looked at another Black woman next to her, and she said, you know what they're doing, right? And I was like, what are we doing? Like, I couldn't believe what was happening in front of my face, that it was like, I hadn't been the other from a Black person in a long time, a Jew, right? Purposefully, we've been marching kind of side by side for a long time, in my opinion. And so that moment when we're going to march for Israel, and these two Black women were like against us, I had to process in this way that I hadn't really processed. And then the rest came. Right. And then the rest came. And then the rest came about Black Lives Matter and the paratrooper that may or may not have been officially sanctioned by Black Lives Matter, that image that happened. And then I thought, oh my God, this is bigger than I imagine this is a bigger thing. It's not just that all of a sudden it's going to create a divide, an actual divide between Blacks and Jews, where there's only been sort of a hint of a divide for all this time. I was really shocked about that, and I'm very interested in more thoughts about why this time.
Jason?
Yep. Hey, thank you. I don't even know really where to start other than maybe to put a little bit of a finer point on what Charles was saying. About 7 years ago, I was told my team and I, or my peers and I, my boss went to a DEI training, an offsite training for 2 days, and the gist of it was that all white people are inherently racist. That if you're white, you can't, that anybody who's of color can't be racist because they're oppressed. So it was basically I hate this term, but BIPOC versus white supremacy. So anybody with white skin, even if you're Jewish, well, you're white, you can hide, kind of thing. And there's one of those sessions where they separated people out by perceived privilege, which was really messed up. I'm still I'm still feeling it today. But to bring it back to Charles's point, I think there's a huge disservice done to the Black community, especially everybody who's of descendants of slavery here, where we're as a nation, that's where when you start including all these other people as if it's all this one big form of oppression versus correcting the wrong of a national sin in the system, you lose sight of what that mission is, the purpose of why there is DEI and affirmative action, and other programs to help people who've been here the whole time rise up. And when other people start trying to hijack that sense of victimhood and team up, it not only takes away from that mission, it just creates far more division than it does building. And I see that within the DEI space where I work. And a big part of why I've gotten so involved is I've never grew up Jewish. I really wasn't much of a thing for me. And quite honestly, we were raised to not necessarily hide it, but just don't be publicly Jewish, or just if somebody asks, yeah, sure. But suddenly, and as after George Floyd and other things started happening, it became very just, white supremacy was to blame for every single thing, even whether it was true or not. It's like the pendulum swung a bit too, just too far. And there was this complete double standard when it came to Jews, that anytime something would happen to another historically marginalized or oppressed group, the company would throw messaging and even financial support behind it. When something happened to Jews in the Jewish community, nothing. There was no mention or anything, where there was like a blanket statement that publicly called out to the national DEI, like, well, that's the anti-Semitic version of all lives matter. Like when you're just going to put out some bullshit blanket statement, or so for a while I was, armed with a lot of facts and the statistics information, and through their public, they have a platform called Yammer. It's like a company, it's like for employees only. It's like a social media platform. I was torching the shit out of them for their double standard. Just like, you say you're for all these people, but you look at the statistics of Jews being the third most attacked group, and it's not just that it's a religious, they look at it like, oh, it's just a religious thing. It's not just a religion. What Jewishness is it's multiple things, but it's, not just religion. It's not just white. It's not, but there's this complete double standard, and I think which led to a huge misunderstanding of what Jewish identity is. But it's actually going through all that, starting from a defensive posture. It's actually given me the tools to, I guess, get in touch with my own Jewish self and Jewish identity,
and use this platform I built, to really make it accessible to everybody who's Jewish. So just, being involved with even programs like Jews of Color Initiative, really listening to them and making sure that this platform reached across all the BRGs to say, if this is how you identify, our group is your home too. Kind of like at the same sense, cleaning up our own backyard before, while we're raising our voices. So that's where I am. I know it kind of rambled on a bit, but finally we do, even though we're not technically a BRG or an ERG, employee resource group, they have given me / the community a seat at that table. So I didn't get fired.
Okay. All right, and Brandy.
Hi, first, I just want to say thank you for having this conversation. I think it's very important. And while I do agree that there's a problem in education, and that's really what I spend a significant amount of my time, professional and personal, addressing. And the social media issue, Elisheva, that you brought up is part of that miseducation. But before I get into that, I want to say that there has been this misconception. The Black American communities are just as susceptible to indoctrination as all other American communities. So I'm not surprised by anti-Semitism in Black American communities, because there's nothing that would prevent that from happening. Even all of the different moments in American history where non-Jewish Black people and non-Black Jewish people march side by side, where the non-Jewish Black American community is no less susceptible to being hijacked by radicalism or anti-Semitism or any other form of bigotry. And we need to acknowledge that. The one difference, which was brought up by multiple people on this panel, is that the idea of Black victimhood is uniquely hijacked for a very anti-Semitic movement. And that can only happen when society as a whole has accepted an oppressor versus oppressed binary, where people want to be the most oppressed because in doing that, they gain the most power. And all of these types of equity programs, not all of them, but many of them, feed into that oppressor versus oppressed binary, which rewards victimhood. And in doing so, in order for Jews to be included, they have to be labeled Jews of color. They can't be proud Jews. They can't be Zionists. They have to kind of shame themselves or make themselves small in order to be included, instead of actually being proud of success, like most other groups of people are. I haven't seen an instance of non-Jewish Black Americans apologizing for emancipation or creating some of the greatest literature in American history and some of the greatest orators that we've seen in our country and in our world's history. So why would non-Black Jews? Well, because as a whole, society is feeding into this oppressor versus oppressed binary, where the oppressor is supposed to take all of the darts thrown at her, and the person that's labeled oppressed can never be critiqued or criticized. And what it ultimately does, besides fueling anti-Semitism and divisiveness, which is ugly and terrible, and we need to work against it and counter it and address it, but it celebrates mediocrity. And I think that given all of the things that our forebears achieved, that does a disservice to Black American history and experiences. It's racist. I mean, at its center, it's not only anti-Semitic, it's anti-Black racism. And I think part of that is not so much telling or thinking that Black Americans can't criticize the trans-Saharan slave trade that existed centuries ago and still exists to this day, but it's not taught. You talk about Black history and African history and Afrofuturism and all of those types of things. And I'm not talking on the university level. I'm talking in the K-12 level. It's not taught. Black American kids don't know about the trans-Saharan slave trade. They don't know that Europeans got the idea to enslave Black people from Muslim imperialists. So there are all of those different, and social media isn't correcting that, like enough. We don't have big enough presence and strong enough message that we're countering it in an accurate way. I think that that's shifting. but this should have happened before October 7th. October 7th was a catalyst for a lot of things because of the horrors of it. But we're also seeing that, social media is being used not only to justify rape as some form of resistance and all the rest of the brutality, but it's also being used to deny what happened. And we're not even talking about the fact that the terrorists, the murderers, the rapists, the kidnappers, the hostage takers broadcast for the all of the things that they did proudly for the world to see. This isn't coming from me, it's coming from them.
Robert?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we also have to discuss is the role of mass media in shaping opinions. And let's put into context a couple of years that led up to the instant moment. I'm going to bring up something no one wants to talk about. We're going to talk about Kanye for a second, and how that very much conditioned the national conversation around this concept of anti-Semitism with relation to the Black community. Because many people, when Kanye was going through whatever Kanye was going through, we came with this same stereotype, the Jews controlling the media. And then all of a sudden, Rahm Emanuel's brother sends out one tweet. And this is what people are saying colloquially, and Kanye lost $1 billion within a couple of days of that tweet going out. The criticism of Dave Chappelle for his SNL opening, where he criticized the Jewish community, and people felt as if we've entered a place where there's certain communities that can't be discussed or criticized. And because of that, the community had been conditioned for the last several years for the propaganda and for this anti-Jewish sentiment to creep in very easily. In addition to that, many of the faces of the conservative movement today, people like Ben Shapiro or Levin or others, are some of the most anti-Black voices in media, also happen to be Jewish. Now, do they represent a majority of the Jewish community? Absolutely not. I have plenty of friends who can't stand the people. You can look at the discussions on all sides of the aisle. But however, when those are some of the forward-facing images that people see, it conditions them again to have this distrust and this lack of direct interaction between the two groups. So then when you have misinformation being fed into this mall, we end up with the outcome we see today. And I think there just has to be more work put in to Black voices and Jewish voices speaking together, and also highlighting the historical ties between the groups. That if you look at any newsreel from the 1950s or 1960s of Black people getting hit by hoses, a couple Jewish guys in the back. If you see any image of Black people integrating a lunch counter or getting attacked by dogs, a couple Jewish guys are in the back working on these same issues. And when people understood those historical ties as opposed to the current media spin on these issues, I think you will see the relations being a lot closer than they currently are.
Elisheva?
Okay. I first want to go back to something else that I heard. When it comes to American context, yes, white supremacy is at the center of it all. When it comes to anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism, white supremacy does not want us working together and is the source of what's happening in an American context. Because of course, that doesn't apply if you're going to Lebanon or Syria or Egypt, because there's a totally different dynamic over there. So white supremacy in itself is a very Western problem that people have tried to apply to everywhere in the world, which is where you run into problems, because if the people that are the oppressor are brown, then how are they the oppressor? Because in this whole setup, if you're brown or Black, you're always the victim. You can't be the bad guy, which is what happens with Jews, which is why Jews are getting reclassified as white, even though a majority of Israelis that live in Israel are actually what you would call Jews of color. But, besides that, I also want to talk about the elephant in the room. Okay, so Black people and Jewish people in America were marching side by side in the 1950s and the 60s, very strong coalition. We worked together to get this whole thing figured out. We haven't been working together for a very long time now. A very, very long time. And it's nice when people put up the black and white pictures and all that, but it's like, that's how many decades ago was that? So let's be honest right now with what's going on with that situation. It's been a while since we've been working together. And the secondary issue is the fact that people love to have conversations about Jews and they love to have conversations about Black Americans, and they never have someone who has both identities sitting in the room at the table, a part of the dialogue, and it really pisses me off. And I don't know why people keep doing this. Like I've seen so many interviews where people are just like, well, what about the Blacks? What do you think the Blacks think? And what do you think the Jews think? And there was actually, and I'm not going to say who it is, but he should have known better because he's in charge of a big organization. This guy was sitting here with Black people, and they started to have, and they were not Jewish, and they started to have a conversation about Black Jews, what we are, what we think, how we are. And in this conversation, this guy conflated Hebrew Israelites with actual Black Jews. I couldn't believe it, because considering who he works for and what he's in charge of, he should have known better, but he didn't. So in this day and age, if we're trying to have real, honest conversations about Black and Jewish community coalitions, you better have someone Black and Jewish in that room. If you don't, I know you're just doing it for fun. It's just performative. Like, let's just be honest, because you just want to keep the ball going back and forth. Like, you did something wrong. You also did something wrong. You did something wrong. Like, but when we're in the room, the game is over. There's no ball going back and forth. So yeah, that's a big problem. And this is the first and only dialogue I have been a part of discussing these issues for the entire month of Black History Month and since October 7th. This is the first time I've spoken at anything. Why is that? Because we've had so many wonderful conversations about the Black American community and the Jewish community not getting along and not understanding each other and not having a bridge. I'm literally a bridge. Why have I not been a part of these conversations? I have many questions.
You've got 3 bridges right here, right here in this room. Jason?
Elishita, thank you. You're stealing the words out of my brain, because I think as cliche as it sounds, yeah, you are a bridge. And I kind of repeat, like, that's one way we could just help fight racism as a whole, is how we connect, how we know. Like, I'll be honest, like I was never really involved with any Jewish community, even though most of the Jews I know were Ashkenazi. But when I was a teenager, I only found out later on or when I was a teenager, that I was even part Sephardic, which I didn't know what that was until somebody explained it to me. And it really, as I'm getting older and learning more about my grandmother who was and Sephardic culture, is starting to connect me to those other experiences and other identities. And it's had me just far more curious about, well, who are the other Jews out there? And really, like, I'm looking for you, because people like me are boring, but I'm just like trying to learn more. It's like we have a connection, and how do I get to know you, and how do we get to come together to help connect on all of our common values that supersede our skin color. So you are a bridge and an inspiration. So I'm trying to, that's been a big basis for the community I've been building at work as well. It's that, it's not, Jews aren't just this one singular thing. It's like there's a whole tapestry. And like they even started a little series of "You Don't Look Like a Jew," and calling out Jews from around the world, like Jews in India, Jews in Africa, Jews in Asia. I don't know if there are any Inuit Jews, but maybe somewhere in the Arctic Circle. But just like all these unexpected identities, so that it's not just this singular monolith that's just, again, from a very Western perspective. So I do appreciate that, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to connect with you guys, because again, it's like, I don't know, since I don't really go to many services, and it's hard to find that, and so that's what I got. Thank you.
Hey, Charles?
Jason, you ought to go to services.
I go to
That's
the
first
local
thing,
Chabad.
Jason. That's the first thing. I'm teasing. I'm teasing. So it seems to me that the emergent problem here is the post October 7th problem is that Blacks think that they should be aligned with Arabs and Muslims for all kinds of reasons, some of which are just simply not true, like racial coloring, because there's more, more than half of the Jews in Israel are darker skinned than half of the Arabs there. But the other thing is that the Blacks see the Arab hatred of us, and they validate their claims that we are the oppressors, the colonialists, and even if they listen to Farrakhan, the slavers of Black people. So if we're, and now this goes back a long, long time, and everybody mentioned a piece of it. Is it education? Is it the media? Is it that we don't work together anymore? Is that we don't have Black Jews together in this? All of those things are true, but all of those things brought us to the point where we are right now, which we have to deal with, and that is many Black Americans believe that they are right to ally with Arabs and Muslims, and I think that's something that needs to be challenged and overturned, because they're not. There are Black preachers around the country who still are pro-Israel and pro-Zionist and pro-Jewish. I work with Dumasani Washington, who you all probably know, very closely on our project to educate the public about the enslavement of Blacks in 5 Muslim Arab countries today. You can buy and sell Black people for a couple $100. CNN even had a little film clip, which I'm happy to show you, of 2 Black men being auctioned off in Libya, and they sold for $400. And Al Sharpton got upset about that for about a minute and a half, and then he let it go. We took Al Sharpton 20 years ago to Sudan, where we were redeeming and liberating Black slaves from jihadists in Sudan. And he was very excited about this for a while, and then I think he talked to Farrakhan and he got less excited. But it's all there for anybody to see. I mean, all the evidence that right now you can buy and sell Black people in Muslim countries. It's just true. And without people knowing that, I could understand why Blacks who haven't been educated about the past slave trade and the ongoing slave trade, and they're possible. I mean, who else is going to free these people but Black Americans? I got to tell you, who else can come and help liberate these people? The fact that they don't know this, to me, is the biggest block to a Black and Jewish alliance.
Okay, Heather?
I'm just going to say that the only time I see Jewish faces and Black faces in the same room, being asked for the same things, or a local politician during an election year, right? Those guys always bring us together because we're members of their community, and when I see that, I always think when I'm at those events, like, why are we not moving in the same direction, right? We are all should be moving in the same direction. I don't often see a lot of Black Jews. Marie now has moved to Florida, so we lost her on my board. But I'm continuously thinking. I will say this. A few days after the Freddie Gray riots, right? And it was a shit show here in Baltimore. It was dangerous. It was lawless. It was everything here. And I decided, I wanted to go down and clean up. I want to go help and clean up, and I, take a couple of friends who we could talk our husbands into, thinking it was safe enough for us to go down with a shovel and a plastic bag. And we start like going down to this event to clean up. And I hear Jewish singing like to a block away. And it turns out to be like the rabbi of a synagogue, Beth Am, in the area, who's down there cleaning up as well. And I felt like I was in the trenches. I felt like I was helping. I was doing things. I wanted to help. I wanted to be a part of Black Lives Matter in that way. And we were. right? And so I think that made it all the more, I just wanted to bring this up, and that made it all the more like interesting. Maybe even I felt, more affected by the way that I saw the divisiveness between Blacks and Jews on as a result of October 7th, specifically toward October 7th. I was like, I stood next to you. I was in the trenches. I went to Jason's seminar and dug out my inner white supremacist and like really looked at shit, examined myself inside and out. And here I go, I'm showing up to fight against people who are torturing and raping and infiltrating Israel, and I felt like you didn't have our backs. You know what I mean? That I was being held a Palestinian flag by a Black woman in DC. It was, I just couldn't imagine. I always thought I'd see you there in the trenches with me, and it felt really bad to feel alone in so many ways, but specifically by, in my opinion, the Jewish African American.
Randy?
Again, I think it goes back to ideology. There's this expectation that if we Jews, non-Black Jews, can show the people of color, Black Americans, that we're just as oppressed as they are because we've been through things, then they should be on our side. And I think that the whole accepting that whole entire ideology is what's problematic. The problem that we see after October 7th, where we have people openly celebrating terrorism, the most brutal acts of terrorism to be broadcast for the world to see since ISIS, and people are excusing that, is only because they're accepting an ideology that is incompatible with freedoms and liberty and civil rights and women's rights and rights for gay people. Like it's completely incompatible with that. If anything is justified, as long as you can label it resistance, then we are at anarchy. And this isn't about color. Yes, we do need to better educate kids. Of course, we need to better fight back and monitor social media. But underlying all of that is the accepting of an ideology that says, yes, you have to go and flagellate yourself until you've beaten out the inner white supremacists. That idea is what's fueling this. That has to be rejected. And the other piece is really having a conversation and education around who the Jewish people are as a people. Jewish people are an ancient people that do not fit an American-centric idea on race and color. And until we push back on that, educate our own communities about what that means and looks like, we're going to continue to see this. There's no reason that anybody who would be labeled a Jew of color should walk into a synagogue and it's assumed that they're part of the staff instead of a congregant. And that only happens because the American-centric ideology and views on race have been accepted and permeated throughout the American Jewish community. And I think that that's something that up until now, maybe there's a shift, but American Jews really have to take a long, hard look at that, what it means to be a Jew as part of the people, as part of Am Yisrael, and maybe take a key from our tribe that's across the ocean.
I had a thought and I lost it. So
You know what? I think Brandy just brought up a really just excellent point there. And it was many, many moons ago when a friend of mine who was Jewish and I served on a diversity committee. Don't laugh, Robert. That I chaired a diversity committee at a private school. We were on a trip together with the kids, and we discussed this dynamic about Jewish the problems and issues that Jewish people were having, the anti-Semitism that were so closely related to what Black people deal with. And I think she was just so right about white supremacy kind of being the king, so to speak, that's driving all the rest of this absolute foolishness. And unless you have that conversation to understand those dynamics, then it's going to continue to be problematic. One of the things that friends, I live in an area that's like 5% Black. I don't even know, literally have no idea how many Jews live here. I know one Jewish person where I live. but I said that to say, like, it's a conversation that's not even had. And the really sad part is people who are anti-Semites, like a person who knows it's a really bad thing to say, you know, a racial slur around me because I'm brown, they'll know because I'm brown, right?
Right.
But around Jewish people, you may not know. So I have white friends that will tell me about an anti-Semite. And the only reason why that person felt comfortable is because they're all white and they think it's okay. And
Mhm.
that's, I never even realized that, like, that's a whole thing that Jewish people have to deal with. So these conversations are just so important because the ignorance, whether it's, you know, from education or whatever, or media or social media, is just real and pervasive, even among the so-called well-educated.
Well, Claude, I want to say that they don't even have to be around a bunch of people who are white. I've had people say stuff to me who, you know, when I was in an organization, they had completely shifted their leadership. I enjoyed the previous leadership. They were very wonderful women and they shifted. And then I heard this lady said something to me. She said in front of everybody. And I just looked at her and said, you know, I'm Jewish, don't you? And, you know, I'm the only black person there. Everybody else is white. But so she assumed she was among friends because she assumed nobody was Jewish. So it's not even a matter around other white people. It's some other people they think aren't Jews.
Right. As long as they're not Jewish, we can say whatever we want.
Yeah, and the average person, I just say in this country, they still don't see blacks as being Jewish. They don't see Hispanics. They don't see anybody who isn't white as being Jewish. They still, you know, black Jews, Hispanic Jews, Asian Jews, Indian Jews. They're all like, what? Huh? They're shocked, surprised, confused. Okay, Robert.
I was just going to add to Melanie's point. Let's also, when we talk about how social media and media has conditioned America, or this divide, think also one like Elon Musk, who runs Twitter, who wants to sue the Anti-Defamation League, who promotes all these kind of neo-Nazi voices now coming back to the forefront of American politics. People that we have tamped down and kind of shouted out of the global public square are now finding more and more acceptance. And many of these ideas are now, instead of having the fact check filter on them, we've now taken that away. And so people are starting to believe more and more propaganda, more and more of the lies around quote unquote Jewish people running the media, Jewish people run music, Jewish people run the banking system, Jewish people run anything that you can imagine. These conspiracies are floating around on the online and on the internet, being promoted by some of the richest people in the world and by some of the most powerful voices in the world. And until we are able to confront that directly, because many of the same voices that promote that sort of anti-Semitism also promote anti-Black racism and are also behind many of these efforts to get rid of diversity, equity, inclusion, to get rid of critical race theory or whatever they have deemed critical race theory to be, in opposition to some many civil rights groups. I think we have to confront those individuals and stop these stereotypes from matriculating their way through social media and media, because then they metastasize into what we saw in the wake of October 7th.
Jason?
You know, it's fascinating because I've been in a room amongst others who assumed I'm not Jewish. I apparently do not look like a Jew. So I too have been privy to conversations when people don't think there is a Jew in the room. But that actually wasn't the point or question I was going to ask. And it really more of when it comes to Black Jewish Americans. I'm wondering again, because it's based on some conversations I've had with other people more broadly on issues of race, whether there's some things are just classism versus outright racism. Because I don't, you know, like my best friend was telling me there was an incident at his synagogue where a black couple, Jewish couple or family showed up, and you know the I guess whoever, you know, people working at the temple assumed they weren't Jewish. They weren't as a rude or dismissive, but I you know I don't, I think it's just part of it is maybe because we're how classism has put people into different neighborhoods, divided up communities. that there's not enough of that actual, it's integration, if you will, or even commingling of Jewish. So like there's that color divide that keeps it apart. Does that make sense? Or I don't know if I don't think I was really asking a question so much as expressing just a thought about, reframing something so that, as I think racism is an extremely powerful and charged word that is now overused for anything that just seems like is disagreeable versus like, taking intention or just other, factors in. It's like people are very quick to jump onto that word.
Charles?
Yeah, I think I was never in a room where people thought I wasn't Jewish. So I don't have the I I don't have these wonderful experiences like you of not seeming Jewish and then catching them, because never happened to me. I guess I want to explain to Robert what I think is the which is a general Jewish problem with DEI and CRT and that stuff, because it's not just Ben Shapiro. It's the Jewish establishment itself now doesn't know what to do when they're confronted with an ideology that says there's a binary in the world, oppressor versus oppressed. The oppressed can never be called on anything they ever do because they were oppressed. And the oppressors, as individuals, even from their race, can never be nice or right or good or virtuous. And when the Jews get plunked into the bad side, we used to be on the good side, right? I mean, there was, the blacks and the Jews and the we were all on the good side. And what we got our place got taken by the Muslim Arab community in America. So now we got kicked off the good team. And as far as I can tell, there cannot be, or at least the Jewish community is asking itself, could there ever be a DEI or a critical race theory that has the Jews on the good side? And I haven't seen it. I know some people are trying to do it, but every time they try to do it, these radical teachers in the classroom will not take what a state guy says, what a Department of Education guy says. Well, you can't do that to the Jews. They will not listen to him. There is no way to monitor what goes in the classroom. These are radicalized teachers who use this theory that are teaching every American school child that the Jews are terrible, racist, colonialists, occupiers. So I'm asking, I want to say this to Robert. That's why it's not, just don't think it's Ben Shapiro and some right-wing Mark Levin guys or whatever. It's the entire Jewish community is befuddled and bamboozled and confused about what we're going to do, because we desire and yearn for the older friendship we have with Black Americans, and we are getting slammed out of it. So that's to Robert.
Certainly, and just to respond, I agree with you on much of that, but I also believe that a big portion of it is we've taken things such as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then instead of actually doing what the work and actually promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, we've taken almost the right-wing talking points and the demonization of what that is and turned that into the actual definition. Critical race theory is a doctrinal course that's been 100 years old. All of a sudden we've turned that into the new boogeyman where people are raiding school boards to try to get rid of those things. So I think that we get to the core root of what these issues are talking about, which is trying to create a society where people are no longer discriminated against for their religious background, where people are not discriminated against for their racial backgrounds, where people are deprived of the ability to live in communities or work in certain jobs based upon their genetic lineage, then it brings us a lot closer. But when we allow, I call them gadflies, to turn these things into political hot button issues where all of a sudden we have to be afraid of the idea that of diversity, we have to be afraid of certain types of education. I think that is what creates that idea of what I was saying earlier that Kanye was pushing, the idea of the imperial secret Jew. There's just secretly behind everything. The reason you don't have a job, the secret Jews. The reason that you can't say certain things, the secret Jews. The reason you can't get a loan at the bank, this is they become the boogeyman of communities far beyond their actual input. And I think that once you're able to have the actual understanding and conversation and realize that everyone is simply people trying to exist within the society and get ahead, and we're not demonizing or turning people into these kind of secret forces along with the Illuminati and the Sith Empire or something, you get a whole lot more cooperation. I think that's where we were decades ago. Someone said, when is the last time we really worked together on some of these issues? We still do on many issues, just not on the macro level we saw back then. But I think we have to start making those alliances more public, start working on more large, big issues together, and then that builds the bridges we need towards the future.
Robert, just one more thing. Just if you, if DEI was what you said it is, there would be no problem. If DEI actually was, let's let everybody be equal, regardless of who they are, where they came from, color of their skin. That's Martin Luther King stuff. We were there for that. But I beg you, Robert, let me show you what they're actually teaching in the classrooms. It's not what you say. It is a binary, and the Jews are screwed. And I can show you that. Everybody on this panel almost could show you that. So I just beg you to be open to seeing that that's the problem that we face. And it's not because we're Ben Shapiro loving right wingers and all that. We have been kicked out of the good team by DEI. And that's just the truth. Sorry.
Brandy, I want to get to you. I know Melanie is dying to respond to Robert and Charles.
I am, because, and I agree with what Charles just said earlier, but I will tell you, as someone who spent 13 years in the classroom and actually taught physical, it's not in the curriculum maps. It's not in what they tell you this is about. It is in the individual lessons that the individual teachers are teaching. It's what is written in those lessons that literally tell you that like white and Jewish folks are the devil, like are the worst. And as a Black person, you are put upon, you are oppressed, no matter what your circumstances. Your daddy's a heart surgeon and you live in a mansion, but you're Black, oppressed. That is not the case. And that is very specifically what DEI does in the classroom. That is very specifically what CRT does in the classroom. And it's one of the reasons why I'm no longer there. Because I found this foolishness problematic. If it were that simple, where it was like a everybody get along thing, then I don't think anybody would have such a big problem with it, but it's not. It's inclusivity unless you're a Christian. Then you can't be, then we don't include you. You can't be a Christian. You can't be Jewish. You can't be religion of any religion, because they literally write that these people are wrong in the individual lessons. That's where you have to go. And the fact of the matter is, teachers teach for like 200 some odd days. They get observed maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So you're not going to be able to catch what these leftists are doing, what these radicals are doing. I think DEI as an idea is a good idea if it's implemented correctly. I stood in a faculty meeting where I was the only Black teacher, and a white principal said to all of us not to write up Black children. Why? Because be careful when you write them up. Why? Because of their environment and where they come from. Now, was that the intention of DEI and CRT? No, it's not. But this is the way it's being implemented, and that is what the problem is. And that's why so many people have a problem with it, that is based on numbers. So consequently, you have Black children who are misbehaving and not doing well and don't respect authority that you can't write up or address, or in my case, want to actually help. You can't do that because they're Black. It's a backward, insidious, racist thing that goes on in its application in earnest. And that's where the problem is. And Robert knew I was going to say that. This is our first rodeo.
We could take it, we could take it the rest of the we could take it the rest of the entire conversation.
Okay, Brandy.
Thank you. I just want to echo what both Charles and Melanie said. And I want to say that obviously it's not every DEI program, but the biggest problem with DEI is the change from equality to equity and what that means and how it manifests. That in order to achieve equity, that you have to lower the bar, or you have to allow some kids to get away with things and not have an opportunity to learn lessons that they need to learn as part of child development because of their racial or ethnic background. And that's in itself racist. Saying you can't teach Black kids this because, you know, they're not quite qualified. I could swear a century ago, our forebears fought back against that idea. But I wanted to address a comment that's in the Q&A about Black movements becoming racist. That I think what I was saying before was misunderstood. One reason that I agree with that part of that comment, or the undertone of it, is that many Black movements do become racist, is related to a following comment: the Red Green Alliance. It's not, I don't think, a surprise to anyone on this panel how Black movements got hijacked by the Red Green Alliance roughly in the 60s, 70s, and that it's kind of picking up where those movements left off in the 60s and the 70s, where they were hijacked by radicals who wanted to use the Black experience as if there were just one to get their ideology kind of widespread out into common culture. And that's been problematic. I think that's what we've seen in a lot of DEI programs. I think it's unfortunate because while the pendulum did swing way too far to the far left, I fear the backlash where we are going to have people that pretend that there aren't still racist people out there, that there aren't still things that we need to work towards as a country, that there's going to be an opposite backlash. And that's not necessarily something I'm looking forward to experiencing and working against, but I think that we're going to end up seeing it because there's this idea that's spread out telling teachers, like Melanie pointed out, that you can't teach these kids. And again, that's something that we pushed back against, our forebears did in generations ago, the idea that, you know, you don't send Black kids to school because they can't learn, you can't teach them. Well, the same ideas and policies are now actually being institutionalized in the name of equity. So we're ushering in generations of mediocrity where we have majority of, in many school districts around the world, significant majority of Black kids who are illiterate or innumerate in the name of equity. I have no idea how that's supposed to be some sort of a progressive ideology, but that's institutionalizing illiteracy and innumeracy.
I think that's part of our issue right there. Is I've noticed, well, we increase this mediocrity throughout this country, and especially in Black and brown spaces, mediocrity is being accepted as exceptional, and it shouldn't be. I mean, I know I grew up with my parents writing me, expecting me to do as good as I can. If, you know, if I got a B or a C, that wasn't acceptable. They expected A's.
Right.
Remember the first time I got an F, I got an AP calculus. I hid it for 6 weeks, told my sister to hide her report card, give me time to get the grade back up, and then we'll tell them. But now kids do it all the time. They don't care. No one cares, and no one's making them care. And you see that in the Black community, you see it in the brown community, you see it in white communities too. Well, on the opposite side, you have Jewish communities where you still have in families that still push. You're still expected to become, doctor, lawyer, scientist. You're expected to have not only a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD. That is also part of the issues, because what we expect of our children are different, and it used to not be. It used to be the same. Black parents expected a lot of the children. Jewish parents expected a lot of the children.
Right.
What happened? Where did that go? Elisheva?
Okay, so I'm not responding to what was just said, but I just want to say a few things really quickly. Number one, I saw that little comment in the chat saying Brandy was defensive. I'm going to say this once, and I'm only going to say it once. A Black woman stating an opinion very firmly is not being defensive. I'm sorry you're not used to it. Now, moving on to the next statement that I wanted to say. Well, you know what? I'll come back around to it later. I just wanted to say that one thing really quickly. No, I'll say it now. There was another comment in there talking about Jews of color and where that came from. Number one, I'm not a fan of the term Jews of color because I feel that it's a very umbrella type of terminology that is used to cover everyone, but it really doesn't, because more than half the time when we're saying Jews of color, we really mean Black Jews, but we're just finding a fancier way to say it. And we're trying to be nice to make everyone feel included, but we're not talking about the Persian Jewish experience. We're not talking about the Yemenite Jewish experience. We're high key, low key, really talking about the Black experience. So I don't like it. We have nothing else to work with at the point in time, but I honestly don't like the terminology. And I'm going to go back to something that Jason said. If you're a Black Jewish family walking into a shul, 9 times out of 10, you're dressed for shul. You're not dressed like a plumber. You're not dressed like you're there to take care of someone's kids. So yes, that actually was anti-Black racism, because you know how we show up for sure. It is exactly what it is. It was exactly what it was.
The thing is, I don't go to a big synagogue. I go to Chabad. So, yeah.
You telling me they showed up in jeans?
I don't even know. I have to think this is a story my friend told me about what happened at his synagogue. They weren't turned away. They just were questioned, but
yeah, that's still just as bad, buddy.
Yeah,
because
and
it
I
happened
think
to me my entire life. Like I don't appreciate it when I walk up all fancy looking, and I'm like usually wearing my name and everything and all that, and they're like, "What are you doing here? Are you Jewish? Like, are you serious right now?"
If you're wearing those ears, I guess if you're, I don't know. I'm not trying to justify it. I just, part of me is just the way I grew up, or where I grew up. It's like I had every diversity but Black. So it was like, and a lot of that, I think, was based on economics and how neighborhoods were divided. So there just wasn't enough intermingling to get to actually know a lot of just Black people in general until I went to college in city in Manhattan, and and it just opened up a whole world where you get to meet different people and know different people, and like and that's where I brought up the point about economics and classes, that classism, where you're dealing with whatever issues of classism that are affected by racism throughout history, that keep people in certain geographic areas, like, or neighborhoods, communities, whatever you want to call it, so you don't have a much.
You're talking about redlining, I'm assuming.
Yeah, redlining. Sure.
Yes. So that's redlining. But once again, when you walk into shul for Shabbos, you're dressed for Shabbos. So all the classism, that's an important discussion, but that was not the situation. Let's keep it honest. Okay?
No, that's cool. Like I said, I don't have enough experience, like, with going to shul, or like I go to Chabad for Shabbat. I go in a t-shirt, and I dress like a slob. So it's like I don't know what I don't know. So I'm not gonna try to defend anybody here. So
okay, I'm gonna finish up what I'm saying. Also, even though I'm talking about a situation that, from my lifetime experience of being a born and raised Orthodox Jew, that's obviously is what it is, I want to clarify something, that a majority of people in the Jewish community are not anti-Black racists. It's a teeny tiny little minority that are doing this nonsense, because most people are not, even though there are some people that try to push this narrative that Jews are racist. That's not true. It's an itty bitty little minority that causes trouble. The real problem is when the good people see it happening and they don't say anything or do anything, because most people are good. They're just indifferent, but that's a whole other problem. But just want to clarify that, because I know how people like to take, they like to grab like little sound bites. Nice try. No, I didn't say that. Just wanted to make that clear.
Illustrative, just to real quick is like one of the reasons I actually enjoy my local Chabad house is because it's much smaller and it actually is a really amazing, diverse environment. Where they welcome everybody who's Jewish. So there is actual racial diversity there. It's authentic. There's they allow, very open to LGBTQ. It's far more, it's a more accepting than, and let's say not my experience, like non-judgmental than like the wealthy Reform synagogues that some of my friends go to, that I've been to for bar mitzvahs or a rare service here or there. So that's where I feel like I'm in my comfort zone because of how accepting you are, that if you're Jewish, come in, and there's no judgment for that. Because I put it in the chat. I don't know if I put it for everybody, but even somebody who doesn't present as Jewish looking, I've felt like, and I grew up in a blue collar part of town. Like I definitely have felt a classism type of experience of, oh, if I'm not dressed in the way all the other the rich Jewish kids are, or I'm not part of that, then it's like, there's an essence of like a cold shoulder there, or you're not one of us kind of thing. So that's, again, maybe my experience is far more unique than most, but that's kind of where I'm coming from with it.
Charles?
Let's go back to Marie's mathematics problem. Talk about talk about expectations in the Jewish community. The definition, the Jewish definition of position on abortion is that a fetus is not a human being until it's got its PhD. Right. So there's two things in the world that a society that's having problems can do, and it either makes you an A or a B. So it's who do we blame or what to do. So I think one of the best things about the Jews is that all the crap we've had in history, all down the line from, anti-Semitism is a virus that morphs. First, they killed us when, it was supposed to be that we killed Jesus, and then they killed us because the worst thing in the world was not to have a country, and they killed us because we didn't have a country, and then they killed us because they thought we were racial vermin, and now they're killing us because we do have a country. So what is the Jewish response to this? Well, our rabbis teach us, don't ask who to blame, ask what to do. And I think that if that were taken by all societies, things would be a whole lot better. Just one final thing. In my synagogue, we had a black man and woman come in one day. Nobody knew who they were. People wondered, gee, who could this be? They were dressed nicely. More people asked them for Shabbat lunch than they would have asked any new Jew. Right? Because we're looking for that old Black Jewish love again. And so, I'm sure that Elisheva's, experience is absolutely true. And of course it's true. And there are a-holes in every country, every society. Racism, every society has racism and racists. And so I think I can say that there's few of them among us, I hope. So
how do we build the bridge? I mean, that's the thing. I'm looking right at you, Elisheva, because I mean, it's I hate to say it sounds cliche, but it's true. Like, how do we do this? How, because it's needed.
One person at a time. I mean, I honestly believe slowly but surely. I have I don't get into too much detail, a very unique child, and I'll leave it at that. And if you ever met her, you would think she's the typical progressive, I don't know what generation that is for the teenagers, but she said she used to go around to each individual, her friends, and teach them the ills of socialism. And because everybody saw her one way and she talked another, they listened to her and they took it under advisement. They weren't defensive, they weren't confrontational. So I looked how she did it. She would talk to people one at a time. So if all of us and everybody watching, we take it one at a time. I know it's long, it's slow, it's hard, but it took us a while to get here too. It was 50, 60 years, well, how old am I? Yeah, 50 years ago, we were working together. Now we're not. We're gonna have to rebuild that. And this is a start. We're not saying who's at fault, but what can we do? Robert?
Well, I've got to go after this, so I'm just going to roll a grenade into the room and then sneak out the back door. But part of it's going to have to be having conversations where we understand where the other side is coming from. A big thing in the African American community is this conversation on reparations from the American government. And the model that many people use is the model of Israel, to say that, well, if we're going to give an ethnic group a nation state because of past harms, past discrimination, past displacement from their own territory, African Americans have a very similar claim here in the United States as the Jewish community has for Israel. There's actually a whole book on it called The New Black Israel Project, which lays out the geographical territory that was laid out by the Reconstruction Committee back in 1865, including the legislation passed by Senator Stevens. It incorporates the 40 acres and a mule that were guaranteed to African American families after slavery. And many people feel that if we're going to if we are going to support the state of Israel, we would like to have the same support when it comes to getting the type of reparations needed to rebuild the African American community. And that goes to Melanie's point that we don't have to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion when you have a state. You don't have to talk about programs to incorporate people in or standards, etc. When you have your own nation state where you can actually build and grow, own property, and start rebuilding the damage that was done over the course of 400 years of oppression to African Americans. And I think that one of the issues we have is people will say, this is my problem, this is my needs, this is what our community wants. And then instead of people saying, oh, let me find out why you want that, what the interest is, how that could work, it's like, no, that's not what you want, that's not what you need. Let me tell you what your people want and what your people need instead. And that creates a dialogue that is non-productive. And I think even a conversation like we had today, pushed out to a macro level, we'll do a whole lot more to push forward understanding, push forward cooperation, help people to realize where exactly you're coming from and where exactly you want to go. And if the goal is to have a united front on issues, then it has to be united in both directions. And I think we've had that in the past. We can have that in the future, and that we can work towards those things together. I'm far more hopeful than I think a lot of people are. And I think that because of our historical ties together and the nature of the communities and the nature of the challenges we face, that we will come back together and be able to fight towards those things. With that, I'm going to run out the back door because I have to go help my wife with something. But I really appreciate you for inviting me. I appreciate everybody on the panel. Feel free to share my contact information with anybody. If you guys know good Jewish delis in Baltimore, please let me know. I am more than happy to come and I'll eat it all. Trust me, I'm known for these things. So thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Robert.
Okay, I know a lot of people have a hard stop at 7:30, and I know this conversation is, we definitely should continue this. I would love to do this again if everybody's up to doing it. Maybe, I know we've got Purim and Passover coming up, maybe after Passover, but I definitely want to do this again. And I would love for us to, examine where do we go from here?
Yep.
From schools, from parents to, where do we go? Like you said, it's a matter of, we don't say, I still tell my kids, you need to don't blame anybody. Right. I don't want to hear anything else. But you still have a whole lot of people out there who are still saying, it's so-and-so's fault, I'm not at A, B, C, or D.
Mm-hmm.
How can we reverse that, for one?